The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar as part of Leeds Digital Festival. My name's Sarah. I'm Head of Marketing and Comms at Sagittarius and will be today's webinar host. Today I'm joined by Kier, and he's Head of Customer Experience, and we'll be discussing how to optimise your digital activities in today's new normal. So just a bit of housekeeping before we start. The webinar will be around 25 minutes long, and we'll have time left at the end for questions. If you do have a question, please type your question into the questions box within the webinar panel, and I will ask these to Kier at the end of the presentation. A link to today's recording will also be emailed to you early next week. So let's get underway, and I'm going to hand over to you, Kier.
Yeah, it's definitely not going to be 15 minutes. That'll be a real stretch. I'll just give you a quick warning that right at the moment where I am down in Kent, which isn't that close to Leeds, I admit, there's quite a big storm going overhead. So if my power goes off, I do apologise. So I will try and get through this as best as I can in this weird time. Right. So normally it'd be nice for kind of somebody else to introduce your speaker, but like some kind of second-rate comedian, I'm going to introduce myself before I come onto stage. So I'm Kier Humphreys. I'm Head of Customer Experience at Sagittarius, as Sarah's mentioned. I'm responsible for lots of different teams in the agency. Any kind of initialism you can think of, it looks like it's under my kind of remit in terms of teams. And I often make more slides than there is time, which may also be the case today, but I promise you most of it's quite useful. So just very quickly, in terms of a bit of about us content, Sagittarius have got offices across the UK in London, in Leeds, and also in Ashford down in Kent. And so I'm just going to just quickly move something from my GoToWebinar bit. This is covering up my notes. Yes, so we're across London, Leeds and Kent, and we're also in Sri Lanka, Ukraine and Dubai. We cover the whole digital space from performance marketing through to enterprise design and build and everything in between. So we're looking to drive conversion, push businesses forward and kind of underpin that ongoing digital transformation journey that every sector finds itself on. We will happily talk to you about us for many, many hours if you'd let us. But that's not what you're here for. But by the end of this, you may wish that it was. So where do we start? It's kind of impossible to talk about anything right now about considering this current context of where we are. And over the next 25 or so minutes, we're going to look at where we are, what it could mean for you, and some key areas of focus to enable you to impact your business or service. And we've got kind of a mixed audience here. So if I say business or brand, it's kind of applicable to all of you, no matter what you're doing. Specifically, we'll look at kind of how attitudes and habits have changed and some routes to improve your ability to come through this period, wherever that is, in a strong position. So in terms of context, where we are now and what does that mean from a digital experience point of view? It's fair to say now that data is prime time. So in the olden days, it would take something fairly kind of monumental to draw a nation around a TV set at 5 o'clock. That could have been Home Away or Neighbours. I can't remember which one was on at 5 o'clock, but it was one of those two. But now it's people gathering around a TV or digitally watching on the BBC website to see what the government are going to tell us, what data they're going to show us, and what's happening in the nation. And I think for me, and I'm 100% sensitive to the kind of the pain caused by everything that's happening at the moment, but I'm looking at more from a parallel in terms of how data is being used and how we're all kind of consuming this. And it led me to consider how much of a parallel there is between the current public health situation and how we all work day to day. So we all know the phrase, the new normal, but what does it actually mean? And I'm going to caveat here that the new normal is not my favorite phrase in the world, as people that work at Sagittarius will tell you. So every time I say it, I want you to imagine Joey doing his kind of air quotes. I could just do it for you as on my webcam as well. Because the new normal, at this moment in time, it doesn't have a real meaning. We don't really know what it is. So I Googled, what is the new normal? And this came up for me. Yeah, that is Doug from The Hangover in a 2013 sitcom called The New Normal. We're not talking about that. This is not a webinar about Doug from The Hangover or Justin Barford, as likes to be known. If you want to watch that sitcom, you can go off and do that now. I wouldn't recommend it. It's not great. So what actually is happening for us all right now? If you're on LinkedIn, you'll believe that we've all kind of read 50 self-improvement books right now. We've lost a stone and we've all become TikTok famous. That's right, I know what TikTok is. But let's be honest, we're kind of fighting our pets. We're working around our children. We're just getting through. So this isn't in any way normal. It's not new normal, it's not old normal. It's about as normal as kind of a hangover day where you don't function, you just wait for that haze to lift. And there's a danger when you start to use the word normal that we suggest some sort of permanence. And with that comes this idea of, okay, what we've got now is what we need to work on. And then you can get stuck into that focus of fixating on the now, not thinking about what comes next or what's come before that can give you some precedence. So kind of summing up 2020 so far, it's kind of fair to say that we're in a slightly strange reality. We're in a reality where disinfectant brands are having to issue alerts to consumers not to ingest their products to cure a virus. And one of my favorite pieces of data that's come out is that the nation's favorite, or I say favorite, the best-selling car in the UK right now is this one, which has now overtaken the Ford Fiesta by a massive amount, which is in huge demand. I think it's fair to say that none of the 2020 trends articles at the start of the year had this happening. As I say, we don't know what's going to be coming up, but we're really in a very strange time for many, many reasons. If you look at these trend articles, though, if you kind of wade back through them again, you'll see, even back to 2009, you know, we've got a lot of time on our hands right now, so I kept going back and back. You'll see that a move towards e-commerce, personalization, a real focus on the customer is part of these all the way through. It's kind of all that's talked about over those years, and we're talking about kind of 11 years here. And we've been using the word unprecedented a lot, and so much of this is. But for marketers, we've known that where we're getting to is coming for a long time. Now, nobody predicted that it would happen like this, not even Gary Vee shouting it down your faces on LinkedIn. Nobody knew this, how we'd get here, but we knew that digital experience would be massive. And as agencies and as brands, we've been kind of planning for this, but there's always something else that comes up to stop you perhaps focusing on your experience as much as you need to. Right now, that's not really an option. And it would be kind of a madness to argue that consumer habits haven't changed during this crisis. Now, you can debate whether it's temporary or permanent, but there's definitely clear evidence that users are more understanding currently of poor experiences than they would have been, say, months ago. So one example springs to mind, and that is B&Q. So in the days of old, or even 2019, which has now become the days of old in common lexicon, having to queue to get onto B&Q's site every hour of the day would have been a mini disaster for the brand. People would have gone elsewhere, and it would have been a real problem. But outside of people talking about this on LinkedIn, and there's been some really disgruntled people on LinkedIn saying what a terrible experience it is. And also our head of multi-channel marketing, Julia, who I know is on this webinar on maternity leave, she told me it's a serious problem that this was happening because she couldn't get into her garden, which when you're talking about serious problems right now, that's definitely a first world problem. Outside of that, though, it's been quite accepted by people, because the other option, if this didn't happen, was that you get onto the site and then you have this disastrous shopping experience where stock availability falls over, orders can be placed at a rate that the firm's logistics can't keep up with. And actually, it would have been even worse than having a queuing system. So I am, and the rest of us are, we're tolerating experiences right now that aren't optimal, but it's because our needs increase, so we're more accepting of it. It's the same thing with grocery shopping. I've used pretty much every online grocery provider that there is. And one that I won't name has a system where you get all the way through buying it. You go through and you see stock availability, you're just about to check out, and it tells you that 10 of your items are unavailable. There's no way to choose an alternative. You literally have to remember what they were, go back into the app again, hopefully find an alternative, get back to it again, and then get told that some of those aren't available. And you do this kind of merry dance over and over. But you keep doing it because right now, if you can get a delivery slot, and just so you don't shame me, my wife is a key worker, so we're trying to limit contact, which is why we're doing it. It's kind of like gold dust. So you'll do anything to do that. Whereas if that was, say, a couple of years ago, that kind of experience wouldn't be as acceptable. So we need to understand that this is happening, that people are slightly more accepting right now in kind of digital experience terms, but that acceptance will fade as our life changes again to wherever it's going to be changing to. So as we said, kind of some things have changed. We've heard the word pivot used constantly. You've probably been in meetings, no matter whether you're agency side, if you're in a client side, you will have heard the word pivot thrown around quite a lot, as around lots of other words at the moment, like unprecedented, the new normal, all of these. But permanent or not, we've seen brands across different sectors benefiting massively from enforced changes in habits. So one, for example, the Mindful Chef, which is a kind of I say it's a recipe box delivery service, essentially. There's far more to it than that, and they'd hate me if I described it that way, but that's what I've got right now. They've seen new customer sign-ups jump from 150 a day to 2,000 a day in a matter of days, which is a 1,200% increase. So not even the most positive plans or kind of forecast plans for that sort of growth. Equally, the Co-op and other supermarkets, but the Co-op specifically, they've had to adopt an agile approach to everything they do now. So creative campaigns where they've had TV coming out. Previously, they were spent weeks or months on a TV campaign, but they've done it in days. They've had to because everything's changing so quickly. And they've been reviewing voice of customer data to ensure that their response delivers to what the needs of their users are at that exact moment in time. If you did it at the same speed that we've done things previously, then you'd be in kind of week 4 or 5 of lockdown, and that's so different to where we were in week 1. So another brand that's pivoted really well, you could argue, is Airbnb. So they've moved from physical experiences and stays to virtual experiences to try and get people through this period, and also obviously to try and monetize it. Now, there are some interesting options. There's a guided meditation with a sheep. You can learn to cook Mexican salsas. And there's also something called Unleashing the Inner Vixen. Now, I didn't really look at this slide until I put it up on quite a big screen. And I don't really know what Unleashing the Inner Vixen is, but I think we're going to move on from that. But it's interesting to see exactly, there are ways to pivot around this and adapt to changing customer habits. But there's no real suggestion that Airbnb will not be looking to go back into stays at some point. So it's about working with what your customers need at this point in time. So that's kind of perhaps more of a futurist look at what Airbnb could be doing. But some things look quite familiar. So Tesco's have been reporting, and Sainsbury's as well, put the same sort of data out, that we've reverted back to this one big shop a week, whereas that kind of feels quite a 90s thing to do, and it's definitely not the kind of little and often that we've seen across recent years. And they're saying that shops have halved, but average basket value's doubled as a minimum, sometimes a lot more than that. So they're having to kind of reinvent the way that they stock the stores and the way that people go through, especially with all the physical changes they're having to make to stores. We've also seen Barclaycard reporting that 55% of consumers now want to support their local stores, and data showing off licenses and greengrocers are growing revenues by 30% in March. So whilst there is this kind of rush to digital to get things delivered if you possibly can, because obviously we're in lockdown, there's also this kind of feeling of we'll work with our local community as well to support them because they're supporting us. So not everything is this, oh, we've moved 10 years ahead. Some of it's actually we're realizing that there's some value in what we already had, which is why it's really important not just to look at now, because actually you can take lessons from what we've done before. So ultimately, and I've kind of touched on this a couple of times across the slides, we're on the same journey now that we were always going on. It's just that someone's kind of pressed the warp speed button and we're going to get there that bit quicker. And that bit quicker may seem like an understatement. I kind of mean, like seat of your pants, scary quick in terms of getting there. But it's not a destination that we are unfamiliar with. If you ever sat in a meeting talking about digital transformation, this is kind of what it was getting at. Now, digital transformation is a massive beast that has always felt a lot of times when I've read things about it or when I've been in meetings we've talked about it, you can see people glaze over and think, oh yeah, but that's miles down the line. It's not miles down the line. It can happen at any point in time. It just seems to happens now that it's come about because of a really horrific situation. But it was always going to come about, so there should always be planning in place. It's also important, though, from a digital experience point of view, to remember that we're all seeing lifestyle changes, but those changes, they vary wildly depending on who you are, where you live, your age, your gender, your health. And it's the same for business as well. It's not a one-size-fits-all crisis. And the messaging has been, we're all in this together, and we absolutely are, but we're all making our way through it in different ways according to our means and circumstances. And that parallels nicely with your digital experience. So you don't assume that everybody's getting through this situation in exactly the same way. There are people that live in poverty, and there are people that have great wealth. There are people that live in remote areas, and there are people that live in flats with no gardens. Their experiences of how this is affecting them are very different. Just as the way they're coming onto your digital experience is very different. They don't have the same drivers, they don't have the same external factors and the context that's pushing them to do certain things. They're all different. So it's I've seen people talking about, we're all in this together and we've got this shared experience, but it can make it feel as though everyone coming onto your site now has a shared experience, so you can treat them slightly more generically. You absolutely can't. They all still have their own individual needs and wants. That hasn't changed. Maybe the needs and wants have changed slightly, but the individual element to it has not changed just because we all happen to be stuck in this strange situation. So I'm going to briefly take you through 3 areas of focus now that have the most to offer you in terms of digital experience improvement over the coming months. So firstly, data quality. And so to understand where you are and to benchmark your current performance, data is key, but it also helps you understand the true live and recent performance of your digital experience. That could be a website, an app, anything you want it to be. The approach fits. So if you can only do one thing in this, I don't want to say quieter period, but in this period where actually a lot of the times it might be firefighting, you may have a huge amount of traffic coming just to your experience because you do something that somebody else now can't do, or you may have a lot less. It's still a good time to run a hygiene exercise on your experience data. And it doesn't matter what platform you're using, if you're using Google Analytics, if you're using Adobe, if you're using Sitecore, any digital analytics platform, take it to pieces. Is every event, trigger, tag, goal set up correctly? Is it firing as it should do? Is it recording data in the right way? Is it all labeled correctly? Do you know what each event is supposed to do and how it works? Do you know then what you're supposed to do with that? And I guess one of the most basic of all things that you can do, and this may sound patronizing to some of you because you may already be doing this, but there are so many people that aren't. We have access to huge amounts of analytics accounts, and the number of people that are not annotating their data, especially in a time like this, is huge. When I say annotating your data, in analytics or many other analytics platforms, you can basically say what's happening. You can add the narrative or the context of what's happening in the outside world that could be impacting your data on that day, in that hour, on that moment. So that in a year's time or 6 months' time, when you look back at this period, you don't just say, oh, those 6 months, those 6 weeks, they were COVID-19. 6 weeks may be optimistic, but I'm hoping. In that period, it was COVID-19, and actually, we can just address it to that, because these last 40 days we've been in lockdown, 39, 40 days we've been in lockdown, it has not been the same every day. There have been different restrictions, and people's feelings and people's needs would have changed over that time. So to just address it to lockdown and then 40 days later annotate saying lockdown ended, in that time there's been a huge amount of change. So you need to be, especially now, this is a great opportunity to do it, annotate your data properly so that you can look back in the future and understand why your data has done what it has done. Why does data matter? I mean, you can sum up really quickly by saying, if your data is crap, then everything else that follows that you do and that you rely on that data and you use that data as some way to back up what you're talking about will be the same. So another question, why are you collecting data? If you've got some data that you're collecting and you find it, if you're doing a hygiene exercise and you think, okay, we're collecting this event on this click, and you can't explain why you're collecting that or what use it may have, stop collecting it. There's nothing wrong with collecting data, but you have to be questioning, especially if you're in an optimization role or an experience role, or obviously in an analyst role. You don't need me to tell you to question data. You need to be asking, so what, to each data point you collect, and understand what it can actually tell you, and if you actually need to know that. But there are no prizes for being data-led, and data-led goes into the new normal category for me, that being data-led is not a good thing. If your data is not 100% accurate, you're going down the wrong route. But equally, we haven't got to where we have in the human race by being data-led. Having data is great, and being informed by it is excellent. And it's almost kind of a check on your intuition. So your intuition and your data can run hand in hand, and it can either back up what you think or it can challenge what you think. But if the data is not right, it's not worth even collecting it in the first place. So running that hygiene exercise is critical to understand what is really going on, and understanding if you actually need to know that thing that you've just worked so hard to work out if it's right or not. It's a really key thing to do, and it's often something that gets done perhaps when a site is built, or often not even when a site is built and then forgotten about. and then data just keeps building up, and then you look back in a year and say, well, what happened there? And you've not been measuring it properly, or you've been measuring something completely spurious that can't tell you what you want to do with it. And in that case, you then have to think about how you're reporting data. So much like we've seen with the recent pandemic coverage, it's not the data itself that sticks in the memories. Now, occasionally you'll see kind of numbers talked about, but a lot of time it's also the narrative that goes alongside it, and that's obviously kind of carefully managed and it's talked about over and over again, so that happens. But things like the peak, turning the tide, green shoots, flattening the curve, these are all phrases that we weren't really talking about a few months ago, but they have now entered our vocabulary, and one of those may end up in word of the year, but perhaps it would probably be lockdown or furloughed, all these different words that have come out of this massive period of change. But all of those words are kind of interpretations of those visualizations that we see daily in the data we're given. And how you visualize data and how you report it is just as important as the data you're collecting in the first place. So this is a genuine data visualization. Now, I've looked at this slide far more times than I actually want to ever look at this slide. And I don't know what that's showing still. And I don't think anybody in the world does. It's a genuine graph. I found a website that was quite an interesting website, which shows what a nerd I am, of the worst data visualizations ever. There were some crackers on there, but I thought this kind of pebble chart thing, I don't know what it's telling you. And I don't think you do, and I don't think anybody else in the room would. So, how you're reporting that data can either shine a light on your work or you can bury it. And, in all seriousness, you can spend weeks pulling data and kill its power in one PowerPoint slide. If it's not, even if it's the most accurate data in the world, if it shows a trend that can change the business, if you don't report it properly, then the people that actually you need to be kind of changing the mindset of with this data are not going to actually do a thing. And I suppose the other one thing that we tend to see with data, and this is one thing definitely to avoid, and something that is happening a lot at the moment, is mistaking correlation and causation. So correlation is essentially two things that have no link. Causation is a causal link, so one has caused the other. If you report data using correlation as some sort of fact, you can get great charts like this, which is one of my favorites, which is the murder rate in the USA compared to the Internet Explorer market share. And you can see the two clearly are linked. They're clearly not, but they correlate. And you can do it with any data. It just highlights the point that if you don't think about how you're reporting data, and if your data is not accurate, you could come away thinking that murderers don't use Internet Explorer. Maybe that's a take from it. It's in no way linked to it. It's not in any way, there's no causal link here at all, but this is what you can get to of your data if you don't think about it properly. So I guess it's kind of three key things to remember from the data section. I would suggest, and I suggest this to any business, is to go away and objectively assess your analytics setup, find the attribution gaps from your key journeys, and take a fresh look at your data reporting. Now, this stuff is tricky if you live in your data, and it's tricky to be objective. That's why agencies exist. But even without an agency, you can force yourself to question every piece of data you have. You have to, otherwise you're setting people that trust you and your data up for a fall. And that's why it's critical to talk about data before we even talk about optimizing anything. It's really easy to rush into going, right, we're going to do conversion optimization, we're going to change this. And then you do it, and then there's no real data behind it, and it's absolutely pointless. If the data is not set up first, then anything you do in optimization is basically still just guesswork, which you can get guesswork right, of course you can, but there's no point collecting data if you're not going to use it. Equally, just as bad as having bad data is having no data. So when we talk about attribution gaps, we see a lot of businesses have things like call tracking set up where they can tell you that someone rang, and then 4 steps down the funnel, they can tell you that somebody bought something, but they can't actually link those steps together. But correlation suggests that 100 people rang and 25 people bought something. So in between, we'll kind of ignore those steps and we'll work out what it might be. Well, you can link those. Sure, it takes time, takes planning, but it pays you to do it. And it only happens if someone like people in this webinar champion it internally. And again, reporting of data. Go away and look at one of the last reports you did. Give it to a family member and ask if they can tell the story of the data just from looking at it. Something that makes sense to you won't make sense to everybody else. And if you've got to explain it, add narrative. if you have to add narrative next to a chart to explain what it's telling you so that somebody doesn't have to try and work out for themselves and undermine your work by picking it apart, then do that. So in parallel with ensuring that you've got the right data being collected, as we talked about, it's also now an optimal time to focus in on your key journeys and the elements of your experience that deliver your return on investment. And there's a real opportunity to learn from kind of a massive increase in traffic or even a lull in traffic. So there'll be different people here experiencing different things. So some of you will be getting a lot more traffic through to your experience. Some of you will be getting a lot less because it's just the nature of the business you're in. But a lot, or whatever happens, I guess you're going to be getting customers who haven't interacted with the brand before in a period of massive instability in their life, coming to you for whatever service or information you provide. And you can get really excited about lots of traffic or really worried about having no traffic, but take it back to its base level of thinking that each piece of traffic or each user is a person, either moving through your experience or abandoning your experience. They're showing you what's good or bad about your experience. And it's a good opportunity now to really focus and learn from that. There are a number of different ways that you can find issues on a site. So the easiest is to hire a good CRO agency. Hi. Or even at the very basic level, you can ask someone objective to use your site. And that can be internally, that can be colleagues that don't work in your team. So you could decide what your key flows are on the site or an app. And you can ask team members who don't work in the team to follow that and tell you what they think. It's kind of a form of guerrilla testing, but it's really, really useful. We all know that colleagues love to tell you when something is wrong with something you've done. So they will be honest and they will pick things apart for you more so than somebody else in your team who's worked on it before and has that kind of bias towards thinking that it works because they know how it should work. Equally though, there's some excellent tools on the market. So Session Cam and Quantum Metric are two examples. What you can see on screen here is from a Session Cam account. It does many, many things. It can flag errors and show you how much revenue it's costing you to have that error by tracking what's in a basket at the point that somebody abandons your experience. Those sort of things can really help you focus in on what you need to be changing, and it can reduce some manual legwork. But I thought I'd show you some of the issues that we're seeing across sectors in terms of conversion, in terms of what's actually really standing out right now that's holding people back. And these issues aren't really that different to what we've seen before, but they're being framed slightly differently now when they're reported by customers or clients. So the kind of core conversion issues we're seeing are absence of information, which could be kind of COVID updates or more fundamental stock and delivery information just not being right at point of purchase. Service issues where live chat is there, but it's not available or people aren't answering. Call waiting times that people understand will be long, but are even longer than they're being told, so the information still isn't right. And complexity of processes. So we're in a time now where red tape is being slashed, we're told, in different areas. Some people may disagree with that, but there are some things you can do now, like mortgage holidays, that have been brought to the forefront by building societies and banks. It's just a quick form fill. Where that before was a bit trickier and involved a conversation that perhaps doesn't actually need to happen. So it shouldn't really be that hard to do something quite simple on your site if these things that are regulated and previously a little bit perhaps archaic can now be made quicker. But we're seeing kind of people focus on, perhaps they'll put a COVID-19 banner up on site and then they're done and off they go and focus on something else. But you've got people coming to the site now with so much stuff going on in their lives that everything needs to be explained perfectly when they get there so that they don't have to think about what they need to do. That's always the advice, but even now it's more important because people are stressed, people are worried about things. They're not worried about your digital experience, they're not worried about how they click through to the next thing. That's not what's bothering them, but that will be a frustration for them because everything else of external kind of factors that are pressing on them make it so that your experiences need to be that bit clearer, that bit simpler now, and they should always be, but this is giving you the imperative to do that. So again, 3 key areas. No matter what your situation is, there's opportunities to drive conversion. Now, they're individual. There's no magic bullet to say, right, if you all do this, you'll make huge amounts of money, other than listening to your customers. You can utilize third-party tools and objective staff to help you find issues on site, but also remember this tolerance of poor experiences will only last so long. We're not in normal times, and the rules of the game have changed temporarily. The leaders in your sector will be using this time to collect data, and assess what people who've never seen your site before stumble over and where it can be improved. And I guess, if you think that this is difficult, we've shown that we can build a hospital in a matter of days. So that little change that you might need to make to your checkout should really be seen as slightly less of an issue than perhaps it's been built up to be. We can do things quickly if we can embrace this agile mindset to deliver change quickly based on insight we're collecting because we've checked out, make sure that that insight is correct. You can achieve a huge amount very quickly. The final one, customer experience. So we're seeing companies, I say companies, we're seeing institutions that are traditionally perhaps slow to adapt because they're so huge and you've got so much to think about. The NHS, for example, which is facing the challenge of a generation right now, but also having to adapt to entirely different situations. So lockdown has meant that there are no visitors allowed, which has meant that phone contact now replaces that personal contact that people used to have. So that means that any questions they want to ask to the staff now has to happen via the phone, which is, that's adding an additional admin that perhaps would have been done differently previously. So there are trusts that are being gifted iPads from generous benefactors. I've seen this in York, where one of my friends works. A business school gave them iPads so the people on the ward could then connect to people externally, which I'm sure was on a kind of a list in various different NHS trusts much further down the line somewhere, because it's a great idea, but money has to be spent in different ways. But the context of the situation has forced it up the agenda. So we've got these massive institutions having to adapt, but we also need to do that at kind of more of a micro level where we're talking about it now. And we're talking about better experiences and adapting, but we need to know what your current performance is to understand how you can improve it. So how are you measuring customer experience? We've all fallen foul of this. We've all received thousands of emails asking us if we would recommend X to a friend or family every time we've interacted with certain brands. And I think the message is just because you can ask somebody, it doesn't mean you should. Less is more on experience management. If you can implement subtle, unobtrusive, simple questions around content relevance or key features of a site, well thought out NPS at the right time, or not asking people the second they land on a site, would you recommend it to a friend? And not asking people for a score, like a 6 or an 8 with no context. The real opportunity to change here is listening and to keep listening. But you can only do that if you give customers a sensible way to talk to you. So, we've kind of said if you're in a CRO or experience role, you need to be asking, so what about data? And this is another one of those elements where actually collecting too much data is not beneficial. So much like we're told that data is the new oil, we're seeing out in the world now that actually a surplus of oil is not a good thing because there's nowhere to store it. It's the same way with data. Just because we don't have any limits on the amount of data we can collect doesn't mean that we should just suddenly decide, right, we're going to ask every customer on every page, do they like this, rank it out of 10. It's too much. And actually it needs to come back from a strategy of thinking, what do we want to know? What are we trying to achieve here? And then thinking about how you're going to ask that, which again, it could sound a bit like a digital transformation piece where it's a massive piece, and how do we start doing that? It's the same way you do with anything. You start by thinking small. It doesn't have to be an elaborate form of collection. It doesn't even have to be digital. So IKEA used to do this. I'm not entirely sure that they're going to do this now, because I don't think anyone's really going to touch buttons over and over again. It doesn't feel like the best move right now. And there's also these outside toilets in St Pancras, which, again, I don't know why anybody would ever touch those. But it's an early warning system. You just press it to say how you're feeling at the checkout today, and it might feel like it's useless data. But this can be combined with various data points. It can be combined with staff sickness, temperature in the store, revenue, the weather, football results, anything you want, which could be molded into an idea to see, okay, when this happens, then time at the checkout goes up or down, which means revenue does X or Y. And you can pull all this together and start to use customer experience data and voice of customer data alongside every other data piece you're collecting. And this can be done on sites, this can be done on apps, it can be done in a really kind of unobtrusive way. So the government website does this really nicely. It has inline information collection. Is this useful or not? Yes, no, why not? And you can learn from that. And you can do this with quite subtle pop-ups. You can something just like Hotjar to ask people, can you find what you're looking for? Yes, no, no, what couldn't you find? then you can resolve that. It's a bit like where people used to talk about when people complained about TV shows, that actually if one person complaining was worth, say, 1,000 or 10,000 complaints, it's the same thing. If somebody fills in that form, they're not the first person to have seen the error, but you can make sure they're the last person. And if you start small, you can roll out that thinking across an entire logistics and operations and purchase chain. So you can get to this point where you're looking at retail, your contact center, and your digital experience across browse, pick up, purchase, delivery, return, support. And you can be asking people exactly what's happening. Are they happy with it? And you can see an early warning system what's happening across your entire landscape just by talking to people in a sensible way. But obviously, when you're collecting this information, you need to listen to it. And I think that that is pretty key here. You'll be collecting data from indirect and direct sources. We'll all have live chat or customer services, some sort of social media support, email, in person, not so much perhaps at the moment, on-site polling, automated feedback requests, all of these things, including indirect feedback from searching on sites or scroll depth or interaction with content or key paths that people are going through. If you're not collecting all that data up and assessing the direct and indirect feedback and working out what you can actually impact based around that feedback, then you're missing a real trick. And again, this is an opportunity to look back and sit back and go, right, what do we actually do with the data we're collecting? If we can combine all this data together that's being volunteered and indirectly demonstrated, we've got intelligence that can power serious experience gains and help you to move through this situation. Again, you can be so agile when you know what customers are telling you across every channel. You can see trends really quickly, and then you can adapt so that next week you don't have the same problem you've got this week. So there's three key things just to remember from this section. So rationalizing the why behind the piece of data you're collecting, not over-egging NPS and just sending out constant, how would you rate this emails? Because they are being tuned out by people right now. And learn from your changing audience. There are people coming to the site right now who are going to be pushing your experience in ways it's never been pushed before. They'll be stressed, they could be working around kids. Some will have plenty of time on their hands. Some will be working long shifts in our public sectors, public services, but we concerned for their safety. Use it as a learning experience, understand what doesn't work for them in your experience right now, and take that and move it on as quickly as you possibly can to iterate, and then you will be driving forward so that when we do eventually stabilize back into some form of old, new, normal, whatever we're going to call it next time, that actually you've adapted and you've listened and you've got yourself set in such a way that you now fully understand how your customers think. And when that changes again, you'll be ready to adapt again. So summing up, this is the time to drive change. So focus on what you can impact and change right now, but also it will carry on you into the future. So it's measuring and attacking pain points of conversion. It's collecting and analysing voice of customer effectively. It's ensuring your data is accurate and joined up as possible. And take lessons from physical locations. In digital, it feels sometimes like we put ourselves on a bit of a pedestal because we can change things in an instant and we can see immediate results and we can measure everything. So that means that we're really agile, but actually we've had physical locations having to adapt to social distancing, mask wearing, stock shortages, placing screens so that people don't infect each other, and every other challenge that's being thrown at them during this period. And they've adapted so quickly that actually we can maybe now learn lessons from them, so that where we talk about these insurmountable digital transformation challenges, perhaps they're not as insurmountable as we think they are. It's just that we haven't had the impetus to do it. And this will pass, but we've got to use this time wisely because others will be. You've still got customers and service users, and right now they need the absolute best version of you. But you're only going to get there by truly understanding your customers to improve your experience and push forward the objectives each and every one of us goes to work to deliver on. Promises is the last bit. So in light of that, normally we kind of put, you can email us and get in touch and we'll have a long conversations. What we'd like to offer right now is that we've opened up basically video consultancy. So for half an hour, you can discuss any challenges that you're having right now. So it's more bespoke rather than this kind of top level approach. It'd be lovely to talk to some new people in this kind of weird time so that we're not all just sitting in our various rooms talking to the same people each day on video. It's a bit strange. I admit that you're basically all sitting looking at my bedroom doing a webinar, but this is where we are. Anything you want to discuss about conversion, customer experience, paid media, SEO, transformation, anything you feel stopping you moving forward. There's no charges, there's no obligations. It's just an opportunity for us to share our knowledge to hopefully help you help your customers right now. We'll email that link out once the call ends alongside the slides. Please feel free to book something in on the calendar link there, and we can talk in more detail about your challenges and opportunities. Which leads us to any questions.
Thanks, Kier. Thanks for that. I hope everybody enjoyed the webinar. I do have a few questions that have come in, so I'm just going to ask them to you now. If customers are stressed and not acting in the way they usually would, what can we reliably learn from asking them to rate their experience?
Customers are always stressed in different ways. So there's no normal way to act. So when we say, not acting in the way they usually would, there's no real way to define how somebody usually would. So right now our collective habits have changed, but our internal references are still unique, and we'll still use a site or an app, I guess, in a slightly different way. And it might be different to how we may have used it a few months ago, but the data is valuable nonetheless. I guess the important part there would be that your experience should be able to flex to people at their most relaxed or their most stressed. If your experience only works with people when they're kind of at their most zen, then you probably need to reconsider what you've built. So I guess, even if customers are stressed and not acting as they usually would, there's still valuable data there, and you should be able to serve them just as well as you could if they weren't.
Okay.
I think that answers it.
Yep. And another question I got here is, which tools would be your go-to to kickstart a program to improve conversion rates?
So I guess the kind of unhelpful answer to that is the tools that you have. It's the equivalent of taking out photography and then kind of buying the best kit but not needing 75% of the features that kit offers. There are tools out there that have huge capabilities, but if you don't have a strategy in place at first, then there's not a huge point in having them. So I'm a massive fan of iteration. So start with something and improve if you need to. You can run an amazing CRO program with Google Analytics, with Hotjar, and with Google Optimise for a minimal cost. And you can run a brilliant campaign with Adobe and Optimisely. It's kind of, you need to work out exactly what you want to get to, where you have knowledge gaps, and where you have kind of capability gaps, I suppose. And then you can work out if your current tooling can get you there. But before you do any of that, the very first step, make sure your data is right.
Cool. Okay. Thanks, Kier. Well, those are all the questions that I have for now. If you do have any questions, like Kier says, please do get in touch with Kier directly. The webinar recording from today will be shared with everybody early next week via email, so that'll be a recording and the slides. And we look forward to seeing you on a future webinar soon. Thanks for joining us at Leeds Digital Festival. Thanks, Kier.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Bye.